Hello, everybody. It's lovely to meet you all. Just so I know who I'm talking to, could everybody please raise their hand if they've ever committed a crime? I can see that some of you don't want to scare the people sitting next to you. Or perhaps you've forgotten that fare dodging, theft of office supplies, childhood shoplifting, under-declaration of taxes are all, in fact, crimes. I work a lot with the police, judges, and politicians, so I'm afraid I can't give you any clues as to whether or not I've ever broken the law. But I will let you into a secret. The people who raise their hands are normal. 9 out of 10 people have committed a crime at some point in their lives. Don't feel left out just because you haven't. There's a whole branch of criminology dedicated to studying you. You've got your own label. You're a lifetime abstainer. Now, I'm not here today to make excuses for our immoral acts. On the contrary, seemingly trivial crimes can have devastating consequences. Think of the potential impact of drink driving, the impact that tax fraud has on our economies, the way that vandalism, litter, graffiti affect whether we let our children play in the streets. But at the same time, I don't want to lock the doors and create Greece's largest and definitely most beautiful prison just because we've all broken the law at some point. I think we're human. And as humans, I believe we are all deeply influenced by the provocations and temptations to crime that exist in our societies. We all have tipping points. We all face moments when our morality, however strong, is bypassed. If my work on crime has taught me one thing, it's that human behavior is much more malleable than we like to think. And today, I want to share with you some of the ways that even the worst human behavior is shaped by circumstance. More than that, I want to show you that we can dramatically reduce crime by manipulating the moments that make us criminal. Let me explain. The first step in understanding how we can become safer and happier requires us to solve a big mystery. This one is about car crime, and it's an epic, spreading across nations and decades. Some of you might remember that in the 80s and early 90s, car crime was a serious and growing problem. Joyriding had become a rite of passage for many teens. It was normal to go to your car and find the window smashed and stereo stolen. In the early 90s, something changed. Car ownership was still increasing, but car theft started to plummet. And the decline has continued for over 2 decades. The shift is dramatic. Look at England, Wales, Scotland. There you are 6 times less likely to walk out of your front door and find your car stolen today than you were 25 years ago. 1 million fewer cars were stolen in the US last year. What has changed so fundamentally? Why are we behaving better? I'll give you a clue. This is the Nissan Sunny, and this is the Nissan Bluebird. If you owned either of these vehicles in the UK over the past few years, I have bad news for you. Your car was more likely to be stolen than if you owned almost any other vehicle. This is a 1996 Honda Accord, the most stolen car in the US last year. So we could just conclude that thieves have terrible taste in cars. But the real reason these cars are more stolen is because they are old and hopelessly insecure. An older vehicle can be broken into with a coat hanger or a brick, and there's no alarm to panic you as you turn a simple household screwdriver in the ignition or expose the ignition cables and hotwire them. These cars, as they fell out of circulation, led to that dramatic drop in car crime. Now, the truth is that new cars are still quite easy to steal if you know how. You just need to buy some simple technological kit on the black market or the dark web. Need to plan a little. But most car thieves were opportunists. And for most, this level of planning was a step too far, making crimes just a little less tempting, a little more difficult, was enough to reshape millions of decisions each year and eliminate millions of crimes. Let's solve another mystery, to understand how we can manipulate the moments that turn us into criminals. This one's set in a sunny resort in Australia, surfer's paradise. It's one of those places that thrives on tourism and a vibrant nightlife. But in the early 90s, its reputation was taking a beating. Violence was spilling out of the bars and clubs, and occasionally turned deadly. Just one punch can kill, not usually because of the force of the blow itself, but from the secondary contact as head hits pavement. In 1993, something suddenly changed. Violence around bars and clubs plummeted. It fell by 52% in just 1 year. What was the difference? Was this security again? Perhaps some dramatic shift in policing tactics? Tougher punishments? No. It was lots of small things. I work with the Dando Institute of Security and Crime Science at the University College London, known as the JDI. The JDI's director is Professor Richard Wortley, and he was part of the team of academics, businesses, local officials, and police who together engineered this dramatic crime drop. They worked from the simple premise that the causes of violence are often quite trivial. Rows over spilt drink and accidental jostling. Fights over the rather limited supply of taxis at the end of the night. Posturing to impress or defend love interests. They work to reduce the chances of these things happening. First, they try to limit alcohol consumption. They reduced the number of binge drinking incentives, fewer happy hours, fewer 3-for-2 offers. They made sure that soft drinks were cheaper. They made sure that food was available more of the time. After all, you're less likely to bump into someone if you're sober and less likely to misinterpret things if you're jostled. Then, venues worked to reduce conflict. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's really hard to get into a fight if the person you want to fight isn't interested. So they worked on creating a much more mixed environment in terms of the clientele, not just attracting hard drinkers. They changed their advertising messaging. They started to bar the very drunk from entry to drive new consumer behaviors. They trained security staff differently. Rather than trying to intimidate people and embarrass them, security staff tried to create a welcoming atmosphere, and they anticipate and de-escalated conflict. These changes together produced our dramatic crime drop. And what I find so interesting about them is that they weren't about making things more secure, but about making things much, much nicer. Reducing stress and strain is an exceptionally good way of reducing violence, partly because so little of it is actually premeditated. A number of local governments in England and Wales improved transport late at night in the city centre. They found that violence dropped with fewer people milling around late at night looking for trouble. If they'd checked, I think they'd have found that sexual assaults reduced too, as fewer women jumped into unlicensed, unmarked vehicles in order to get home on a cold night. Uber is hated by traditional cabbies everywhere. But by reducing costs, increasing taxi availability, and reducing both driver and passenger anonymity, I suspect they may well have reduced violent crime. These two examples show that we can dramatically reduce both violence and property crimes by manipulating the moments that turn us into criminals. And there are so many more. Sometimes it's possible to almost entirely eliminate criminal opportunities. In the US, bus drivers were being robbed at exceptionally high rates until a number of US states introduced a system where bus drivers could no longer pay change in return, and they installed safety deposit boxes into which fares went. Drivers literally couldn't access any cash. Sometimes we need to shape environments and criminal decision-making much more subtly. Next time you go into a shop, I want you to think about whether the layout encourages or discourages crime. The 7-Eleven convenience store chain did this in the 1980s. After consulting with convicted robbers, they decided it was a good idea to move the cash desk from the back to the front. And they also got rid of all the signage in the windows so the cash desk was definitely visible from the street. They improved lighting inside and outside of the store. They reduced the number of entrances and exits. Over a 10-year period, as this was rolled out across the country, robberies fell by 2/3 when they were rising almost everywhere else. It may be clear by now that you need to look at the circumstances of crime in detail and develop tailored strategies to reduce crime. Burglary has plummeted everywhere as people have improved household security. But government agencies have found that blocking off the back alleys behind houses and improving lighting both also make a difference. And it should be clear that this is not just a job for the police. Businesses, engineers, technologists, and designers can all dent crime rates. After all, is there a more tempting target for graffiti than this? But what about this? Apparently, this sign, unlike its predecessors, lasted a full 2 years before someone managed to squeeze in the F. Now, you might be a bit skeptical about these approaches to reducing crime. Perhaps you think that crime is caused by poverty, or you think that criminals are so corrupted that they won't stop until they're behind bars. In either case, surely, if we make any one type of crime less tempting, criminals will simply go off and find other criminal opportunities. Well, my JDI colleague, Professor Kate Bowers, has looked at precisely this question. Her team examined 102 different successful crime prevention initiatives to see whether crime reductions were compensated for by increases in crime in nearby areas, or whether falls in one type of crime were achieved at the expense of increases in other crime types. What did they find? Well, in around a quarter of cases, they found that some crime was displaced to neighboring areas, but that displacement was never complete. So there was still always less crime overall. In a full half of cases, there was no displacement whatsoever. And in a quarter of cases, they found something else was happening. Rather than falls in crime in one area leading to increases elsewhere, reductions in crime had halo effects. Falls in crime spilled over into nearby areas. When you think about it, this actually makes complete sense. If you eliminate one gang-related shooting or reduce one drunken assault, you eliminate the inevitable retaliation nearby too. If you stop a bike theft, you reduce the temptation for a victim frustrated to steal one themselves or perhaps buy one for cheap on the black market. When I go into a shop today, I can assure you it never crosses my mind that I might steal something. But what if yesterday I'd gone in, the shopkeeper was out the back, I was in a terrible hurry, and I happened to run off quickly without paying? Committing a crime somehow reshapes our cognitive horizons. And knowing that a crime is common does too. Imagine you're a teenager, growing up in an area where it's normal for teens to steal cars. How can this not affect your view of acceptable behavior? And committing crimes can lead to more contact with other criminals and harmful entanglements within the criminal justice systems. A number of studies have now tracked people throughout their lives to see how different life events affect their behavior. They ask confidential surveys, and if they find two teens who are committing exactly the same crimes as teenagers, and only one of them is caught and punished, their lives start to diverge in slightly unexpected ways. Rather than the person who is caught being less likely to commit crime, being deterred, they find that the person who is convicted and punished is more likely to be involved in crime years later. So our numerous crime reduction successes are not only genuine, they may have wider crime-reducing benefits. It's for this reason that I think we are close to solving another much bigger mystery. Overall crime rates have fallen very dramatically in recent years. Better security on the parts of businesses and individuals, and our tailored, temptation-reducing approach to reducing crime should get much of the credit. I'm quite optimistic that we are on the edge of an exciting new science of crime prevention. But I have a deep fear. I fear that all of us, all of you, won't let this happen. To invest in experimental and evidence-based crime prevention, we need to divert resources from traditional responses to crime and let go of deeply cherished beliefs about crime and its causes. Those on the left love to think that poverty and inequality are the only causes of crime, and that we can't do anything about crime unless we tackle these entrenched social issues. Those on the right think that crime is caused by a permissive society, and that if we don't have more police and ever tougher punishments, we can't do anything about crime. We are all deeply attached to the idea that crime is caused by criminals. We like trying to punish or profoundly change criminals, rather than, in much more effective ways, manipulating the moments that pull people towards crime. I've often wondered what's behind our obsession with criminals. Perhaps it's media accounts of crime. They bombard us daily and stoke fear, gain support for punitive policies. Perhaps it's our diet of morality tales and whodunits. You know, those detective stories and James Bond films where the film ends when the baddie is caught, or even better, falls off the edge of a cliff. Or maybe we simply yearn for a much less complicated world, one in which complex problems like crime have simple, single solutions, one in which people are either universally good or irredeemably bad. Whatever the causes, we too often forget that our behavior changes depending on the circumstances we face. We forget that we change, mature as we age. You reformed criminals are proof of that. And we forget that in real life, the film keeps rolling long after the criminal is caught. If cars are still easy to steal, they will still be stolen. Cultures of binge drinking and stressful environments will still create violence. I want to change the way we see crime so that we can change how we respond to it. So today, I call on you all to recognize that we can dramatically reduce crime by manipulating the moments that turn us into criminals. I call on you to challenge those who say we can't do anything about crime, and those who say we can only dent crime with ever bigger prisons. I call on you to vote for and support those politicians who seek to prevent crime, not just to punish it. If you do, I believe we can create a world that is much safer and much happier than it is today. A world that helps all of us to be good. Thank you.